Let's go.
So I wanted to begin with comment reply to Ruth, but I don't see her with us. Maybe she's watching the game. But Rabbi Kalman, you send me her email, and I'll tell her that I began with her comment. If you recall, last time, the issue was that it says in Yirmiyahu here. Let me hold on a second. Let me share my screen here. I mean, she made a very good point. That's why here, if you look in Yirmiyahu in chapter 52, right at the end, verses 6 and 7, it says, B'chodesh harevi'i b'tisha chodesh, in the fourth month and the ninth day of the month, things are very bad in Jerusalem. And then verse 7, a breach was made in the city. And so that's the breach there. And if you look there, this is the source that's cited about the fast of Tammuz. But the problem is, it says here on the 9th, not the 17th. So Ruth said, well, wait a second, that's referring to the first Beis Hamikdash, not referring to the second Beis Hamikdash. And I said that for the Yerushalmi, they view both them as taking place on the 17th, and they explain that the reason it says the 9th there is because it's a mistake. It's a mistake in the Navi. The people had, well, it's not a mistake in the Navi. The people had a mistaken view of it, and the Navi just recorded what the people thought. Now, speaking historically, it's very hard to say that, obviously, that the same thing happened on the same day. And more from an academic perspective, you would say that the reason that it's when Yerushalmi says it happened on the 17th, no, the shot is it's really the 9th. The Yerushalmi says the 17th because they're trying to be symbolic. They're trying to connect the two. But I do want to say, because what Ruth said, that really it's only the first Beis Hamikdash is the 9th, the second is the 17th. That's what Tosfos says. Tosfos raises the question. And unlike the Yerushalmi that gives this radical answer, which Rav Kook uses to therefore say that general misconceptions among the population can be included in the Navi because the Navi is reflecting what the misconceptions are. Tosfos says no, that the Bayis Rishon is one, Bayis Sheni is another. The problem is, though, then what do you do about the fast day? And what did they do in the first Beis Hamikdash? So that you're saying the first they had a fast day on the 9th, and then later it gets more and then the 17th it gets more complicated, because if you look in the Rambam in Hilchos Taniot, well, actually here's the Mishnah. The Mishnah in Tainit says that 5 things happened on the 17th of Tammuz. It says the tablets are broken, the burnt offering was nullified, the city of Jerusalem was breached. So it doesn't say if this is Bayis Sheni or Bayis Rishon there. Now we're going to see in a minute, some of the commentators say that this is all Bayis Sheni, even the daily burnt offering. But that's not what the Rambam says. The Rambam says, if you look in Hilchos Tanios, chapter 5, 17th of Tammuz, 5 tragedies, what are they? The tablets are broken. In the first temple, the offering of the daily sacrifices was nullified. And then what does he say? The third one, the walls of Jerusalem were breached in the war leading to destruction of the second temple. So the Rambam adopts the Bavli's position that the 17th of Tammuz is only the dates for the second Beis Hamikdash. But then you got a problem, because later on in this, 2 halachas later, or actually 2 halachas later, what does the Rambam say? These 4 fasts are explicitly mentioned in Nach. And the first one, he says, the fast of the 4th month. That's the 17th of Tammuz. Wait a second, though. How could the fast of the 4th month be Tammuz? We just saw that if you look in the Navi, the fast of the 4th month is explicitly not the 17th, it's the 9th. So how could the Rambam tell us that the fast, if he's going by the Bavli, that the 17th is only the second Beis Hamikdash? How could he say you derive it that's said in the pasuk? Because then it should be on in the 9th. Well, it's a big problem. Many people discuss it. The Minchas Chinuch has this, as this is wont, as a big chiddush that really there is no date per se. It's just a month. Av, Teves, Tammuz. The sages decreed, or the prophets, that it has to be in a month, and therefore it doesn't really matter what day. So even though the second Beis Hamikdash is the 17th, as long as it's in that month, it's fine. And that's how the Minchas Chinuch explains it. Others explain it differently. But the big question is, so what about in Bayis Rishon? Presumably in Bayis Rishon, the fast was had to be on the 9th. And then it was later changed. So I'm going to send that to Ruth when Rabbi Kalman sends me her email. Okay, we finished up.
Wait.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
I
Then
didn't hear. Right. So you're talking about Beit Rishon for Tisha B'Av? It was destroyed on Tisha B'Av, so there was no fasting on the
no,
night
I'm
of
talking
Tisha
about Shivasar B'Tammuz. Tisha B'Av is a different issue as well. It's the same, but you raised the question that when
B'Av.
it says in the prophet, it says in Yirmiyahu, the 9th of Tammuz, you say, well, that's Bais Rishon, not the seven, not like the Yerushalmi who says it's the same, 17th on both of them. And I pointed out, I don't know if you were on by it when I got to it, that Tosfos says what you say. And then we went through the Rambam. But the Yerushalmi sees them as the same. The Yerushalmi understands, it says that verse, even though it says the 9th, it really happened on the 17th. Now, granted, looking at it historically, I think people would say that the Yerushalmi, the whole idea is they're trying to connect the two, but not that it really happened on the 17th. But I mean, shot to the Yerushalmi as it did, and they give an explanation. They say the people were wrong, and the prophet records it. That was my only point. So I wanted to say that your point last class that you said that the simple meaning is that the Yirmiyahu was speaking about Beit Rishon, and the Mishnah speaking about Beit Sheni is correct. That's what Tosfos says.
All right. Well, okay. Well, it's not worth arguing
Okay,
about.
at the end, if you have something, send it in the end. We'll get to it again. Ein mukdam u'me'uchar. Now, we finished up chapter 4 last class. I do just want to, just a quick summary, just because I want to make one more point. If you remember, according to Rav Kook, prophecy incorporates what the people believe. And then we saw there, Rav Herzog develops this idea, and he says the Torah speaks in the language of men. So with this approach, the Torah need not, or Nach, need not tell us history because it's representing what the people believe. So you could say, I mean, unfortunately, he never wrote his Guide of the Perplexed. Can you imagine if the Rav and Rav Herzog wrote a Guide of the Perplexed, what we would have? But so he doesn't tell us how far he takes this. But so, for example, using his logic, was there ever a flood? Well, according to what he's saying, there doesn't have to be. As long as the people believe that there was a flood, then Joel Orlowski has an article about this. The people believed it, and because we know that there was all these ancient traditions about floods, but they're very idolatrous. So, for example, in Gilgamesh, the reason the gods want to destroy the earth is because humanity is making too much noise and it's keeping them up. So they want to destroy it. It's a very flippant reason to destroy it. So here you have a flood story where it's done for reasons of morality. So if, let's say you prove that there never was a flood, it doesn't matter because the purpose of it, the people believed it. Dibur Torah kol shalom b'nei Adam, and therefore the Torah is using this to make it into a moral thing. And Tower of Babel. I mean, is this intent on telling history? Is this so people believe? I mean, this opens up all sorts of interpretive possibilities. You know, one of the Rebbe's at Gush, I think it might be Navon. I think he's at Gush, Chaim Navon. You know, some of the academic scholars want to say that it's anachronistic when the Torah speaks about camels and Bereshis. So Navon, I think it's Navon, or maybe it's the other one, the one who every Friday has a shiur with the Rosh Hashiva of Gush online. His name escapes me now for a minute, but he says that what does it matter whether there are camels or not? If the Torah wants, for whatever reason, to tell the story with camels, it puts camels in. Maybe there wasn't. Maybe it was a donkey, but that's not important, he says. I will tell you one more thing on this, that Rav Shlomo Fisher. Rav Shlomo Fisher he passed away a couple of years ago. Unfortunately, let me want to give you show you what he looks like because although he spoke in many of the religious Zionist yeshivas, he was not at all from the religious Zionist world. He's from the Haredi world. Well, let me just here. I'll pull it up. I don't need to get to a video or anything. So Shlomo Fisher was the Rosh Hashiva of Itri, and he passed away a few years ago. He was a big advocate of this idea that the Torah records things that are not true, historical information, even our common belief, even if it's incorrect. And he gives a couple of examples, not just the Torah, Tanakh. He says let me show you something here from the book of Ruth. He says, if you look at, I thought I had the book of Ruth opened up, but here it is. If you look at the end of the book of Ruth, here. Oh, no, I don't want to hear that. My problem is my screen is something's blocking it, so I can't get to, there it is. Okay, if you look at the end of Ruth, look at these generations. And you see, by the way, this is paralleled if you look in Divrei Yamim. The end of Ruth, chapter verse 18. Now, these are generation of Perez. Peretz is the son of Yehuda. So you have Peretz, then you have Chetzron, and then you have Ram, and Aminadav, and Nachshon, and Salma. And then Salmon seem to be the same, and then you have Boaz, and Oved, and Yishan. So the problem is here that the dates seem to be much. I mean, when did King David live? I don't know, 10th century or so. And when would Yehuda have lived? 1600 BCE, 1500? I mean, there's no way that the generations work. There has to be something missing here, although it doesn't give anything missing. It just says these are the fathers and the children. So how to explain this? Rav Shlomo Fisher says as follows. Read you word for word what he says. Hadvarim nichtevu kefi shahaya mesoret ba'am amami b'li dikduk. Kacha, kilshon b'nei adam. That it's recorded there in accordance to what the tradition was. B'li dikduk. So generations are missing. They messed it up, just like the Yerushalmi says. They missed a few. That's not important. This is the tradition they had, and it doesn't really matter. Rav Fisher said the same thing we spoke last class, and one of you emailed me about Rakia. He says that, I quoted Shadal as saying that the Torah, Dibur Torah Kilshon B'nei Adam, that the Torah speaks in the language of men in the description of Rakia, and that the water being above. And Rav Fisher gives this example as well, but he gives something more. He says from last week's Parsha, if you look in Noach, if you look in chapter 7, verse 11, what does it say? It says, Nivka'u ho mayanot tahom rabbah v'arubot hashamayim niftachu. The windows of heaven were opened. So Rav Fisher says this shows that in the days of the Torah, and he actually says primitive. He uses the language, he says both in primitivi, that they believe that there was water above the rakia, which was let in. Now, this is not today how we understand rain. But if you look at the beginning of Breshis, there's this conception that water is above the rakia. And here we have an example, and he says there's many other examples of this, where the water is let in, that is, water's already up there. And then the water's opened up, the windows are opened up, and the water comes in. He gives another example. An example we know, we all know very well, because we say it so often. Look in, oh, hold on. Look in Devarim, chapter 7, verse 11. What does it say? No, sorry, not 11. Chapter 11, verse 17. We say it in Shema. What does it say? V'charaf Hashem bachem, the anger of the Lord will be kindled against you. Ve'atzaras hashamayim, shut up the heaven. Rabbi Fisher says the same thing, that this is based on a conception of where rain comes from. Now, I'm not really sure why you have to say that. I mean, because even today that we know when we understand where rain comes from, we could also use the language that, is it such a problem to use that sort of language that Atzaras Hashamayim, God shuts up the heaven, doesn't let, we speak about the sun rising and the sun setting, even we know that that's not really the case. But that's what he says. He and this is the Rosh Vitri, and this idea that the Torah speaks in the language of men, which the Rambam used for things like anthropomorphism, describing God having emotions. Rav Herzog puts it out there that maybe we have to interpret it this way, and Rav Fisher says not maybe, but absolutely we have to. And in my book, I cite other examples of it. The last thing I just want to mention from the book, or from this chapter, the second last thing is, because I mentioned Shadal, he makes a very interesting point. He speaks, he adopts this approach also, that the Torah is given not like Schroeder or Aviezer are saying that the science is really real science, but we just have to know how to interpret it. He says, no, it's given it's given in accord with the primitive understanding of the people at that time, but he uses this as a proof against the Bible critics. What's the proof? Well, if you look in Bereshis, chapter 8, what do we see after Noah comes out of the ark? I mean, if you pay attention to Torah, you remember this right now. He offers the sacrifice, and it says God smelled the sweet savor. Shadal says that, the Bible critics claim that this Bereshis was written many hundreds of years later during Golos Bavel. In Golos Bavel, no Jews thought that had a conception of God smelling the sweet savor. That wasn't something. They had moved way beyond that to a much more sophisticated understanding of God. He says the fact that you see in the Torah this description, which is so anthropomorphic and so primitive, he says that's the proof that it was written at the time it was written. Not that because it couldn't have been written later. They never would have used. You don't see this sort of language in Yeshaya and Yirmiyah or any of these other things. So I think it's I never thought of that till I saw Shadal, but it's on that pasuk in Noah. He says that, so I think it's quite fascinating. Okay, with this we finish chapter 4. Now we're up to chapter 5, and I call chapter 5 the problem of heresy. And Herzog was Rav Kook was very focused on the issue of heresy because it's an amazing phenomenon. There's always been heretics ever since Spinoza, I guess. He's the first maybe open heretic and first secular Jew. I mean, there were heretics before, obviously, but to publicly proclaim it and to say to not be when you have people like Uriel da Costa and others, when they're put in cherem, fine, they give in, they retract, they recant. But Spinoza didn't, and he was able to live because he could live in this secular sphere, which wasn't possible earlier on. You either were a Jew or a Christian, and if you weren't in the Jewish community, you had to be in the Christian community. But this is such a big issue because heresy is rampant. Obviously, it starts in the late 19th century in Germany, but most of those heretics became reformers and then assimilated. They really weren't part of the community in the same way. And um, for someone in Eastern Europe, but certainly not in Eretz Yisrael. If you're living in Germany, of course, you're living with them. But what you have is the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, you have a new phenomenon, like which you never had before. You have Jews who reject the Torah as a matter of principle, but don't want to assimilate, don't want to be like the nations. They could have moved to London or New York. They could have, stayed in Europe and be part of the Bund. They could have done, but no, they come to the land of Israel. They're sacrificing themselves for the nation of Israel, for the land of Israel, sometimes dying, in attacks from the local Arabs or malaria. How are you supposed to judge these people? These are heretics, atheists, and yet look what they're doing for the Jewish people. It's a new era. We never saw anything like it. So it's a very big issue. And Rav Kook looks at it both theologically and halachically. The theological approach was mostly known. But we're going to see soon a halachic approach, which is completely new for the new writings. So the first thing I want to note is that this is something we already knew because it's in his letters that Rav Kook says, because of heresy is a halachic matter as well. And there's all sorts of halachic problems. What do you do with someone who's a heretic? Can you count him for a minion? Herzog has a number of passages he deals with this. One of his letters is a famous letter to the Yaakov W. Wolofsky, the Ridvaz of Tzvat. Earlier, he was in Chicago, and from Slutsk, where he writes to Rav Kook, "Hey, you're welcoming all these heretics. You think there's something good about them, but we have a Shulchan Aruch, and the Shulchan Aruch tells us how to have to deal with these people. We seem to have, we forgot this today. We give anyone an aliyah. Do you know, according to the Shulchan Aruch, you can't give them a Chal Shabbos and aliyah. How do you give them a Chal Shabbos and aliyah? But we assume today that all Machal Shabbos, they don't know any better. They're Tinok Shanishba. Rav Kook is one of the first to deal with this halachically. Yaakov Ettlinger dealt with him earlier on, but Rav Kook is also one of the first, and he says to the Ridbaz that when the Shulchan Aruch refers to heretics and that they're not part of the community, he's referring to people who don't have a segula. He calls it a segula. That is the one who just wants nothing to do with the Jewish community, who abandons it, who, unfortunately today, after October 7th, we see many Jews, heretics, not part of the Jewish world, they've been brought back, and now they're connected. But unfortunately, we see many who are Parish Minat Tzibur, who are exactly what Rav Kook says, they don't have the segula. Rav Kook was in London when the Balfour Declaration was being formulated, and he met these Jews who went to the British government and protested the Balfour Declaration. We don't want this. So when Rav Kook speaks about those Jews who don't have the segula, he means those Jews who have no connection to the Jewish people. As opposed to, look, I understand Chabad, every Jew has the Pintel Yid, it doesn't matter. Rav Kook is not like that. Rav Kook, he's not like the Ridbaz. He's very broad in welcoming, but not every Jew, just because you're biologically Jewish. You have to have the segula. What does it mean, the segula? We know plenty of Jews who are not at all religious, don't know anything, completely, but they care about the Jewish people. They give tzedakah, especially after October 7th. They support it. Even Larry Ellison gave money to for Sedei Wrote. So we have, but then we have lots of Jews who, and unfortunately you've seen it, the as a Jew, be it at Academy Awards getting up as a Jew, or we see it in New York City, what's going on right now for those who live in the New York area. So Rav Kook is clear that not all Jews, yes, he says to Ridbaz, there are Jews who fall into that category, but not the Jews I'm speaking about, not the Jews who sacrifice themselves, who come to Eretz Yisrael. Rav Kook also says that the people, they're Tinok Shanishba. What he means is, he says, they've been led us, even though they grew up religious. Because classically, Tinok Shanishba is, it's just the classic rabbinic text is like you're kidnapped. You're raised, let's say, in a Karaite household, and you're taught one way, and that's all you know, or you're raised in, completely not in an observant environment. But the people Rav Kook was dealing with, most of them, the ones from Eastern Europe, certainly came, many of them, from religious backgrounds. So they knew it's not that they're a Tinok Shanishba, a babe who's captured and grows up not knowing anything about Judaism. But Rav Kook says no. He says that the era they're in, the zeitgeist, pushes them in a certain direction. So it's almost like they're an anus. Actually, he says they're anus. They're forced into this, because of the culture. That even though they were given a good Jewish education, they were forced, as it were, to be led astray. And a lot of the problem, as we'll see, is the traditional rabbis didn't know how to respond properly. But speaking halachically, he says in one of his letters that yes, it is true that it's forbidden to raise any doubts about Torah. However, that just because you have doubts and questions, that doesn't make you a halachic heretic of the sort that all the rules, which today we don't really pay attention to anyway, because we assume everyone's a Jewish Nishva, but even in an era where you're dealing with people who went to yeshiva, and so many of these people went to yeshiva and then threw it all out to become Zionists. I mean, how is such a person Jewish Nishva? You were in Sabaki Yeshiva or the Mir Yeshiva. You learned a number of years. Your father's a rabbi, and then all of a sudden you become a Zionist, become a completely Machal Shabbos, an atheist, and you go to Israel to create a new Jew. In what possible universe could you be a Tinok Shanishba? And so Rav Kook says that because the zeitgeist forced them into this, but he also says that even these people are not to be regarded as heretics with all the halachic implications of it, unless it's absolute denial. However, if they just have doubts, that's not enough. In fact, Rabbi Lamb, without knowing about it, I don't believe that. I take that back. I think he does quote this letter. He has a book called Faith and Doubt, which is a collection of essays, and basically tries to find find room for the doubting Orthodox Jew. Rav Kook says that only very few people can say that they really deny. Most of them are in area of doubt. They're not sure. They're agnostic. They're skeptical. Uh, if one can state explicitly, I'm an absolute atheist, 100%, and I completely reject the Torah, all that, okay, but most people are not like that. They still have some doubts and they're not sure. Fine, they live as heretics, but deep down they might, maybe it's possible, maybe it's true, maybe there's some idea of God. Uh, so Rav Kook is malamed zchus, as we say, find some justification in that respect. For Rav Kook, only absolute denial of basic Torah truths are enough to make you a heretic, which is in contrast to the Rambam, who requires actually positive affirmations. But then he says something which is amazing, which you can even maybe justify these people. Some of you have been with me for years. We've spoken about this before, the great dispute of the Rambam and Ravad. And if you were with me in Provence this summer, we actually learned it. The Rambam says in a very unforgiving way that if you deny certain things, and one of the things he says, or if you believe certain things, you're a heretic with no share in the world to come. And one of the things he mentions is if you believe that God has a physical form. So on the spot, the Ravad says, well, what do you mean? Do you believe God has a physical form, you're a heretic? These people don't know any better. They could be good Jews. The Ravad even says they could be greater than Rambam, but they're not sophisticated theologically. So how could we regard them as heretics? But from the Rambam's perspective, and we've spoken about this in the past, it doesn't matter. They're considered heretics, as Rav Chaim Brisker put it. Nebuch not bikoros is an apikoros. If you're a Nebuch apikoros, you don't know anybody, you're still an apikoros. The Rava disagrees, and this is a dispute that goes throughout the generations. Rav Kook stands with the Rava in this matter. And only with the publication of the Shmona Kvatzim do we really see to the extent of this. Rav Kook says as follows, listen to this. And had Ratzi Yehuda Kook published this, there might have helped stop some of the heresy hunting in the religious Zionist world. But listen to this. He says, if you have a mistake about an Ikar Emunah, about divine matters, that's bad. However, it doesn't turn you into a complete heretic, destroying your soul, all that, as long as the mistake is in an intangible form. As long as it's just a belief you have. There is no essential uprooting, he says. He says, only if this belief, this heretical belief, follows into actions, does that make you a heretic. He explicitly exonerates the orthoprax, the social orthodox individual, from the halachic category, from the theological category of a heretic. And he says this is actually close to the Rivad's view, because the Ravad says if you don't know any better, that you're not a heretic. Your idea, your viewpoint is heretical, but you are not a heretic. Now, really, it's really very different. I think he says it's close to the view of the Ravad, but it is different because the Rivad's I guess in a sense it is similar because the Ravad is not talking about in practice. It's all in theory. You have a view that God is a physical form, but you're still a shomer Torah and mitzvos. So too, you're a heretic. You don't believe basic things, but in practice, you still are. You're social orthodox, to use the title of Jay Lefkowitz's famous article that appeared in commentary. He's not justifying orthopraxy, but he's saying that you're an erring Jew, you're not a heretic. This is a very significant passage. It's a complete rejection of the Rambam's notion of 13 principles. Because the Rambam says, because Rav Kook says that you can deny principles, but as long as you're still an observant Jew, we don't regard you as a heretic. And as long as you're, and this is in line with the Rivad's position. So this is a very important position. And basically, he's saying that when faced with contemporary heretics, you look at the whole person. Look at the whole person. The person has a belief which is you don't accept, which is inappropriate, but there's many other positive things in this person. And this is it's a very liberal perspective. In fact, he says, Rav Kook often speaks about himself like in the third person. He says that there are those tzaddikim, and he's, of course, one of these tzaddikim, if not an actual tzaddik, potential tzaddik, whose souls are so connected to the building up the land of Israel that they judge everyone who's connected to the land of Israel through the virtue of chesed. Even if the people are heretics, these people are atheists, many of them. And yet, if you have the virtue of chesed, you see the positive sparks within them. In fact, Tzvi Yehuda quotes his father as saying that the greatest heretic in Israel is more of a believer than the greatest believer among the non-Jews. Now, that's a far-fetched statement, and I don't accept that to be true, but you get a point of where he's coming from, that even the greatest heretic among the nations, among the Jews, still has more faith, he's saying, than the non-Jewish believers. In fact, Rav Kook himself says that the greatest heresy in Israel has more holiness than all the beliefs found in the nation, because even in heresy, if you scratch away the surface, there are holy sparks. And this is an important theme in Rav Kook. There's holy sparks. So I mentioned atheism. What could be the holy spark in atheism? We'll get to it in a few minutes. Even atheism has holy sparks. But just before we get to it, then I'll just tell off the top of my head the obvious one, that atheism cleanses our beliefs of inappropriate views of God. So you have childish views of God. So once you cleanse that, then you can fill the atheist. Now he doesn't have anything. It's an empty shell. You could fill it with true views. Rav Kook says that a lot of these people became atheists. They didn't really deny God. What they were denying was the simplistic, foolish, childish ideas of God that they were fed growing up in Eastern Europe. That's what they were denying. But really, they weren't opposed to God when God would be explained in a proper fashion. He speaks about the irreligious, these irreligious who have no connection to Torah, ostensibly, or even to God. Rav Kook says, as long as they are focused on ethical activities, megamot musariot, I think today we would call that social justice, these actions are to be regarded as drishat Hashem, as searching for God. Now, how could they be searching for God? These people reject God. But no, because for Rav Kook, every Jew has deep inside their soul this connection to God and the Jewish people in the land of Israel. The problem is it's been overlaid with try to imagine, let's say you see these commercials, these are your lungs, nice pink beautiful lungs, these are your lungs on when you smoke and how they look all gray. The problem is that all these Jews, these modern Jews, they're like the lungs that are all black. They have all these ideas, these heresies and everything, but if we're able to remove them off, to wipe away all that dirt, they still have the Pintalayid there. They still are connected. And that's the job of the tzaddikim in modern times, to bring these people. These people couldn't stay in the diaspora. They couldn't stay in the galut because their souls are above the galut. They have to remove themselves. Something is calling them back to Eretz Yisrael. They sense that the galut is destruction, and it's time to rejoin history now and return to the land of Israel. It's going to be the job of people like Rav Kook to bring them back to their birthright, which is deep down in their souls. We just have to remove all these transitory ideas and the dirt that's on them till they get to the purity. And Rav Kook says that it doesn't bother us if we see these people doing social justice and they don't speak about God. They don't speak about religion. They're just doing it for its own sake. Because he says we know that the very desire, the very urge for these ethical activities arises from one's soul, and the soul is divine. That is, this isn't some intellectual thing where people come to a conclusion, well, let's intellectually figure out how to make the world a better place, and we have to go help people and sacrifice because then in utilitarian, then maybe they'll take care of us or we'll feel better, all that. No, it comes from your soul. And what is your soul? Your soul is divinity. It's a piece of God gave us. I mean, it's not divinity in an actual theological sense that It's part of God per se, that we'd say a dualism, but it comes from God. It emanates from God. Rav Kook sees these people as serving God even against their own will. And you might say this is paternalistic. In fact, Rav Lichtenstein, in a comment that was recorded, that it was my year in Israel, 1985, and that was the 50th anniversary of Rav Kook's um, death. And there was a big conference at Heichal Shlomo, and not Heichal Shlomo, at it was a Heichal Shlomo. And they had a number of speakers there. Now, I still remember that there were signs for this in Jerusalem, and I didn't go. But later on, I read a description of it from Avi Ezer Ravitsky, and he said, first thing he said was it was a little strange because it was hard to know. Israelis refer to Rav Kook as Harav, and Americans refer to Soloveitchik as Harav. So sometimes you didn't know first who the Rav they're talking about is. But he quoted something. Rav Lichtenstein was asked to speak, and he spoke. As far as I know, this talk of Rav Lichtenstein has never been published. I don't know if it was ever taped. And all I know of is what Ravitsky recorded, although Rav Lichtenstein's views on Rav Kook's ideas were expressed elsewhere. Maybe today, if not today, next class, we'll get to his conversations with Rabbi Sabato. You see some of it. But Rav Lichtenstein, in explaining why he was not attracted to Rav Kook, he says he thinks it's akin to Genevat Dat. Now, what is Genevas Das? Genevas Das is like if you're going to you cheat on a test, or you go. The example is someone's going to be away for Shabbos and you owe them, so you invite them. You owe them, so you invite them to your house, knowing they're not home. You go into a no, I was going to say something else. It's Genevas. Genevas man. I tell when I do with my students, we do the Ten Commandments. I teach a class dealing with the Bible. And everyone can understand the Geneva stealing. I don't even get to Geneva Stas with them, but I give them another example of Geneva, which they can appreciate, which they never thought of. And I think in the non-Jewish world, this concept just doesn't exist. There's a lot of concepts that we take for granted, which don't exist. I work in a Catholic university with religious people, and I have to tell you, the idea of Lashon Hara, I mean, the idea that we try to train ourselves not to and raise our children, I mean, you don't see this. But here's an example I gave the students. And I think they agree with me afterwards, but no one ever would have thought of it. Unfortunately, we have people in our community who don't think of it. You go into a store there, some sort. It doesn't have to be a computer store, let's say. A guy shows you around for half an hour, explains to you all the different computers, you write everything down. Then you go home and you order it from Amazon based on the information you got. That's Genevas Ziman. You stole his time. He could have been he could have been with another customer and made a sale. Now it's fine. If you didn't, if you ended up not buying it because, but you intended to buy it and you didn't, and then you get somewhere else, that's one thing. But to go in there as people do with the intention of using the person's time, car dealership or whatever, when you never intend to buy it, that's a form of Geneva. And it's not just Geneva of his time. It's also could be Geneva of money, because these people work on commission often. So Rav Kook says that he said there's a big misconception among the new generation in Eretz Yisrael. They think that to be an ethical person and to be involved in social justice is in opposition to the Torah. And Rav Kook says no. Every good character trait, and as we know, derech eretz, is part of the Torah. They think that what they're doing is against the Torah, so therefore they oppose the Torah. But what they're doing is the very essence of the Torah. And it's a problem we still have today. People assume that if you're involved in certain activities, that must mean you're social justice reform. On the contrary. He even says, one of the big fears, the big heresies of these people was the denial of reward and punishment. Basically, there's no afterlife, there's no reward and punishment. It's a free-for-all. And Rav Kook says that there's holy sparks in this view also. He's a Makubal, so everything has holy sparks. So what's the holy sparks? Well, that means that all these people are doing the good because it's good. For thousands of years, people only did the good because they thought that they were going to be rewarded in heaven. And they only refrained from doing the good, refrained from the bad, I should say, because they are worried of a punishment. These are people who don't believe in an afterlife. They don't believe in reward and punishment, and yet they are doing the good. They're sacrificing of themselves to help their fellow man. Why are they doing that? They don't believe they're going to be rewarded because these people are at a very high level. They're doing it for its own sake. They're helping their fellow man because it's the right thing to do. So here we see that even the denial of reward and punishment, now granted, these people will eventually come back and learn that there is a concept of reward and punishment, but we see that even the denial of reward and punishment has a holy spark because it enables people like this to do the good for the sake of the good without any hope of any reward. That's an amazing, and by the way, this is an example of Cook sees us moving closer to the Messianic era. Because at what he says, this is an amazing generation we're in. What other generation would people do the good for its own sake without any expectation of reward? That must be that we're at a high level. Okay, let me skip a number of pages. I want to move on to in chapter what I discussed in this chapter. Okay, well, I talk on page 81 and 82 what we spoke about. I already said, explained really atheism, how atheism can get rid of simplistic, foolish beliefs. He also says that atheism comes from the religious. The religious did not have a high moral standard. They did not behave appropriately, and therefore Jews were led to the idea that, well, if this is religion, I don't want any part of it. And if this is how people who follow God's word supposedly act, well, then it's not for me. So Rav Kook says that the religious community has to take some of the responsibility as well. But there's a value, as I said, because atheism, when these people will return, they'll have a more sophisticated religiosity, will have washed away all the superficial views of God, the false and simplistic ideas. And then he says something else, which, okay, well, I have to tell you, Rabbi Kalman, we got to speak the truth, so I have to say it. But I was on a podcast, a very, very large podcast, a Christian podcast this week in England, which gets tens and tens of thousands of listeners and viewers. And the person doing it told me he listens to classes on Torah and Tanakh classes, I gather, on Torah in Motion. So maybe he's listening, but I have to say it was we were speaking about Jewish views of Christianity. So Rav Kook says in this podcast I was on, so I'll say it now. Rav Kook thinks that one of the positive aspects of atheism is that it performs a service and that it saves the world from the impurity of minut. Now, minus, means heresy, but in Rav Kook's terminology, minut means Christianity. Kfirah, not always, but generally for Rav Kook, doesn't just mean heresy, it means atheism. And minut means Christianity. So we're going to see in more detail, Rav Kook sees positive views of Christianity, but he also sees negative views. And now we're at the stage where now we're moving into an era where the positive that Christianity, its positive role, we're going to move beyond it soon enough. And atheism, what Christianity brought in a physical God and a man God. So atheism, we're not talking about atheism in the Jewish world now, we're talking atheism as a universal phenomenon, cleanses the slate, tabula rasa, so there's no more idolatrous views of God. And now, because these people are tabula rasa, we can fill them with a pure idea of God. So when he speaks, that's Rav Kook's idea of the value of atheism writ large, as opposed to just in the Jewish community. Following that section, I deal with Torah from heaven. The end of the chapter section is called Torah from heaven and its denial. Because tied in with all these people, it's not just a denial of God and Judaism, it's tied in with the Torah from heaven, denial of Torah as well. It's part and parcel of the same thing. And Rav Kook he doesn't speak about he didn't have this phenomenon that, I mean, he mentions already in the Shmona Kvatzim, this phenomenon of people who are deniers, but it doesn't affect their world. In other words, they're outside their mitzvos, the orthoprax. And he's no doubt thinking of people, who knew in Europe or Maskilim or just religious Jews. However, the phenomenon he saw in Eretz Yisrael are of the open rejectors of religion. That we know. So he doesn't really get into any great theological discussion. If he was dealing with people who were complete deniers but observing mitzvot, we'd have more discussions. That's not what he's referring to. That's in modern times. We have many people who discuss the phenomenon of orthopraxy. For Rav Kook, it's just those couple passages I mentioned to you. Rav Kook is dealing with people who deny that the Torah has any divine origin, and therefore, since there's no divine origin, there's no reason to keep it. Rav Kook is going to try to speak to these people on their level and argue that even if you don't believe in the divinity, the divine origin of the Torah, there still is a reason, not just a reason, a responsibility for you to keep the Torah. And, well, now, on the one hand, this isn't surprising at all. After all, if someone would any Orthodox Jew tell a non-observant Jew that it's acceptable for them to eat on Yom Kippur? No. The fact that they don't believe it, that doesn't mean that they're putter from it. They still have to keep it. So we understand that. But from the standpoint of the non-religious person, unless for symbolic reasons or nostalgic reasons they want to do it, they don't see any sort of obligation. Rav Kook, however, wants to provide a justification why even these people should see that they need to follow the Torah, even though they don't believe it's of any divinity. And he says he's going to adopt, as we've seen before, again, the approach of the Rambam. The Rambam does not believe in the eternity of the universe, but he argues on the assumption of the eternity of the universe to prove the existence of God. He does this in the Mishnah Torah. And therefore, what the Rambam is teaching us is that you can adopt an argument even if you don't believe this argument, but the other side accepts the argument in order to prove it to the other side. Like you can say, for instance, to someone that, let's say someone doesn't believe that murder is wrong because God says it's wrong. So you can make an argument. Well, I understand you think there's nothing wrong with murder because you don't believe in God. But what about the fact that this person you want to murder has a young child, then the child will feel terrible because the child doesn't have a parent? I mean, that's not the reason why we believe you shouldn't murder. But you can adopt that argument in that circumstance. So Rav Kook does the exact same thing. So if Rav Kook could show that even with acceptance of biblical criticism doesn't mean that there's no need place for mitzvot, it would be a great achievement. Now, I already told you that in Yehuda Mirsky's wonderful book, he says as follows, quote, Rav Kook suggests that one may accept the findings of biblical criticism and still keep faith with tradition. I thought that sentence was poorly formulated, as it implies that Rav Kook thinks that biblical criticism is acceptable. That is, you can accept the findings of biblical criticism and still keep faith with tradition. That's not what Rav Kook says. Rav Kook says that even if someone, unfortunately, chas v'chalila, accepts the falsehood of biblical criticism, this doesn't mean that he should then discard Torah observance. So it's really different. So how does Rav Kook go about doing this? Well, first of all, he says Jews observe rabbinic laws. Jews observe minhagim, customs. So much of what we do are customs. And the Jewish people recognize that rabbinic law is valuable and custom is valuable, and these are additions to the written law. No one believes that these customs are given from God to Moses. No one believes that these rabbinic laws. I'm not talking about Al Chamosh Sinai. I'm talking about something the rabbis make up. No one thinks, and by the way, we say Asher Geshem Savat Sivanu about these. Not only that, when you, at least Ashkenazi, I don't know about Sephardim, if you read Megillah from a cloth, let's say Rus, you say the bracha. Koalis, why do you say the bracha? First, it's a minhag. Well, we make a bracha on minhag Ashkenazim. And, but you say, Asher Geshem Savat Sivanu? Yes, now's not time to go into the whole theology behind this, but Rav Kook says that we know certain things are not from the Torah, and yet we follow them. So that shows us that there's good reason to follow things, to various practices, even if you don't think they come from a higher source, even if you only think they're from the Jewish people or the rabbis. And to that, he says that mitzvot in the Torah should be seen the same way for you, people who don't accept a divinely revealed Torah. Namely, that these laws are valuable for what they do. They make, basically, he argues a Mordechai Kaplan type of approach. They give us community, they show wisdom, and you should treat them just like we treat the rabbinic laws. He mentions how nationalism, le'umiyut, is strengthened through the observance of the mitzvot. We can only be a people if we, the Shabbos, that's what makes us a people. Achad Am said it best. The Shabbos have kept the Jewish people more than Jewish people have kept the Shabbos. So he says that he adopts a number of different approaches. He says it doesn't matter, when the Torah was written, or because once the Torah has come down to us and it's been accepted by the nation, you have a responsibility to keep it because you're a Jew. And this is your national heritage. Just like our national heritages follow rabbinic laws. Now, I have to say that it sounds nice, it's interesting, but at the end of the day, it doesn't really work. For the simple reason that if you believe in the Torah, divine Torah, then you buy into the whole system. So rabbinic laws make sense and customs make sense. But if you don't believe from the first step, at back that there's a Torah, then why should the Torah be your constitution, your national constitution? You could, because they did it for thousands of years, but you could say they did it for thousands of years based on an error. And so it doesn't, that it was divinely inspired. So it doesn't really work. But he gives the best approach to this. Isaac Breuer, another thinker, also tried to adopt a similar approach. There's been a few people who've tried to argue that just because you're a heretic doesn't mean you should observe Shabbos. And it's obviously been convincing because I know lots of people who are social orthodox. By the way, when I say social orthodox, Jay Lefkowitz's piece, I know people in the Haredi, especially the Hasidic world, who are social orthodox. I think it's much more common in the Hasidic world than in the Litvish world. That is, people who are unbelievers, but they think it's a good lifestyle. And they're private heretics. They're private heretics. That's what Rav Kook says. They are not considered halachic heretics because they still observe Torah and mitzvos, and they're not public about it. Even the Rambam in the Mishnah Torah, he says ha'omer. He makes it it has to be like public. But if you're a private heretic, you have a place in the Jewish community. Now, you know what I want? Oh, I only have 2 more pages for the chapter, so let me finish. Now, we know that many people were driven to reject Torah Sinai because of various discoveries, archaeological discoveries. You see Hammurabi's code, and their attitude was that, the Torah is just one law code. We have Assyrian civilization and all these ancient cultures, and there's nothing unique in the Torah. If you look at Hammurabi, you see very similar laws. We have stories, like I mentioned before, of the floods, and you have all these things. So there's nothing special about the Torah. Rav Kook says no. Obviously, he could point out the differences I mentioned earlier, but he says, what do you think? Of course, they're going to have nearest and texts are going to be similar. And all these things that we've discovered recent years, this should strengthen belief. Do you think when you had people like Shem and Aver and Noach and all these people, and Methuselah, you think that they were not going to have an influence in that part of the world? You think that they're, and yes, you have similar stories. So fine, the Torah preserves the true versions of the stories. Doesn't mean true in historical sense, because even the creation stories, there's other creation stories, but the correct messages, that it makes perfect sense, Rav Kook says, that the cultures in that part of the world should have similar stories. They should have their own myths and everything, because they too have been influenced by the great prophets we know. Rav Kook says it would have been surprising. Rav Kook says, if you would tell me that there's no other cultures that have a flood story, or no other cultures that have similar laws to ours, that would be the problem. The fact, because we believe that there are prophets from the nations who preceded Avraham and spread ideas about the one true God. So that's how I end the chapter. And the last the last sentence I say that it's the Mosaic prophecy that preserves the original message before the texts were distorted. That is, before everything that's Rav Kook says, everything that's similar to the Torah that you find in the ancient civilizations are distortions of what the original truth is. And now, in the next chapter, chapter 6, then we'll get into what Rabbi Kalman mentioned before: natural morality, the Jewish masses, and Jewish law. That's where we get to some really provocative things. But everything is a little provocative because Rav Kook he's a mayan mitgaber, as they say. So I'm going to take some of these questions. Rav Maidan, yes. So Rav Maidan has a weekly shiur with, I forget who he has it with. They sit outside, and I don't know who
Amnon
the
Bazak.
Amnon.
Rav Amnon
okay.
Bazak.
So I'm not
Amnon.
sure if it's Bazak. I think it's
Yes, it's
Yes, it's
Amnon Bazar.
Bazak. Amnon
no, I know,
Bazak.
but who says about the camels? I think it's Navon who says, okay, so if you tell me there's no camels in the days, but the Torah wanted to tell the story with camels. So that's yes. So I've only listened to one of them. My son loves listening to their Friday afternoon. I think maybe it's posted Friday afternoon. I don't know, or maybe he just sends it to me. But I know my son is a big follower. He loves listening to Rabbi Bazak and Rav Maidan with their well, the fact that you have a Rosh Yeshiva who's an expert, Rav Maidan and Tanakh itself, it's a sign. One of the revolutions of Rav Kook is, the focus on Eretz Yisrael, on the land, and also is connected to a focus on Tanakh. And you have in the religious Zionist world this focus on Tanakh, and the idea that you study Tanakh as an independent. It would have come without Rav Kook, but in Rav Kook's, among the followers of Rav Kook, this became very important. Now, this moved away from Rav Kook, because once you start focusing on Tanakh, then all of a sudden you get the Pshat. So someone like Yoel Ben Nun, although he sees himself very much as a follower of Kook, in the more traditional circles of Rav Kook, it's Tanakh with Chazal. But if you look in many of the Tanakh people today, it's a return really to the Gaonim and the Sephardic, medieval Sephardic interpreters. I'll be upshot. Joseph says, I've mentioned in previous class that Rav Kook thought the Jewish people have an intuition for knowing which parts of the Torah are literal even today. Is this related in some way to the Torah speaking to the common man's ideas back then? I mean, it is related. Rav Kook was asked, where do you draw the line? When is it? I mean, the question he was asked really was about literalness and not literalness. And he says that there's no exact measure, but the Jewish people with its intuition. Now, that is tied to the other point, because Rav Kook also says that the Torah describes things in a certain way in line with the understanding of the people. So as the people would advance, they would then have an intuition and understand that certain things are to be taken literally, and certain things are only, say, metaphoric or symbolic. So the two are definitely connected. But in the letter to Moshe Zaidel, he doesn't talk about the Torah speaks in the language of men. He's just speaking about the idea. He says that the creation story we understand is not to be taken literal, and then he says that in general we know that that we don't know where to draw the line, but the Jewish intuition will find a way. So Mike says, where can we find the quote from of Shlomo Fisher? Okay, now this is, if you notice in the book, I say meant in the book in private conversation. I have it on tape. It has never been published, and many people had conversations with Shlomo Fisher. Unlike what I'm telling you now is not just conversation; it's actual tape. So anyone can hear it, but I can't put it online, and I can't. But anyone, if you see me with my phone, I can play it for you with my phone, and so that's. But Rav Shlomo Fisher had many conversations with people, and he uses the word primitivi. He says it's Torah is given. Not only that, in the private conversations, but this is not just private. Rabbi Tzal Naor wrote about this. He says, but he also in the conversation I have, He says that he does not see a religious problem. He says this with post-Mosaic additions to the Torah. He says this was the approach of the sages of Ashkenaz, as we know. And what Rabbi Tzal Naor, who was a very close student of Rabbi Shlomo Fisher, in fact, in Rabbi Tzal Naor's writings, he has correspondence back and forth with Shlomo Fisher. He quotes Shlomo Fisher as saying that, Ramosha Feinstein said the parish of Yehuda Chassid's commentary, in which he says speaks about post-Mosaic additions, it's heretical because it goes against the Rambam's eighth principle. Rav Shlomo Fisher said to B'tzal Naor, he doesn't understand. Ramosha doesn't know that there are Rishonim who didn't accept the Rambam's 13 principles, and they didn't accept that. So that what he told B'tzal Naor, I also have. Um, Jacob says, what, according to Rav Linstein, is the Geneva Stas or Cook? Oh, you're right. Thank you. I forgot. I got lost in all my tangents here. Okay, so he says Geneva Stas. So we know what Geneva Stas is. And he says Rav Kook is guilty of Geneva Stas with quotes. That is because he's stealing the thoughts, literally stealing the thoughts of the irreligious. The irreligious say that we're here because we reject Torah and we reject traditional Judaism. We want nothing to do with your God. We're building a new civilization. He says, well, that's what you say, but really deep down, you really are serving God without even realizing it. So he doesn't even give them their own thoughts. He's stealing their thoughts and telling them really what they believe. That's a form of paternalism that I don't think anyone today would be comfortable with. And look, you have to accept the irreligious, Asher Husham, wherever they are. But Rav Kook couldn't accept that because by definition, a Jew cannot stop having a connection to God. It's inherent to them. What they can do is they can overlay it with such evil and such darkness that they break their bond. Could they come back? Yes, they can come back. But until they come back, we don't regard them as part of the Kehillah because that's okay. Maybe Rav Kook on his own would have said differently, but the Gemara speaks about people who are Parish Minat Tzibur. If you depart from the community, and it doesn't mean make your own shul. I mean, yes, it does mean that. But no one who opens up a shtiba, we call them a heretic. That's not what it's referring to. It's referring to people like when the Jewish community is fasting and mourning and crying, and you're out there marching for Hamas, you're Polish Minat Tzibur. I don't care. I don't care what Chabad says. You are not a Jew in any sense that we regard you. That's just the reality, in my humble opinion. Susanna says there's a Hasidic story about the atheist Rebbe. I'm sure there have been atheist Rebbes. Look, you want to give up being a Rebbe? It's a good job. Just because you don't believe, you can
No,
you
the,
can
this,
be you
this,
can help people. You can do all sorts of things, I
the
guess.
story is that there's a chassid who hears about the atheist Rebbe, and he wants to go and visit him and study atheism with him. So he
Yeah.
he goes out on a trip, and he meets the Rebbe. It's on a Friday afternoon, and he says, "Oh, I want to study atheism with you." He said, "Okay, but it's Erev Shabbos. First, I have to go to the mikveh." So, and then, so one thing leads to another. He has to daven, he has to make kiddush. The Shabbos, the whole Shabbos passes. He said, I don't understand. He said, no, my atheism, that's between me and the Kodesh Baruch Hu, but, a Jew has to be a Jew.
Yes, okay, very good. There's a story like that also about the Vilna Gaon meeting some guy at an inn. Whether the Vilna Gaon ever was at an inn, I don't know. And the guy's eating tarfus, and he says, "But you're the same sort of thing, but you're still a Jew. You don't believe. It doesn't change the fact." Basically, Rav Kook was trying to say the same thing. Whether you believe or not, you're still a Jew, and this is how you have to live. And I mean, He tried to make that case. There's a story they say about these two atheists in Eastern Europe. So one decides to go off, do what he does, sow his wild oats, and the other says he's going to go to the yeshiva. We'll meet up in a year. He wants to see what they teach there. So after a year, they get there, and the guy now is religious and everything. He says, "What did you learn there?" And he says, "What do you mean? What I learned? I learned that to be a Jew, you have to do this, you have to do that." And the upshot of it was he never talked theology. You go to a yeshiva, you could be in yeshiva a whole year, you never hear the name God, but you know how to observe Shabbos and Kashrus, and maybe that's a problem. And Rav Kook thinks that is a problem, especially in our day that we don't speak about God. And that was one of the reasons we lost many of these people. But in traditional yeshiva, that's not what you do. You learn to be connected because he came back after the year. This person is completely religious, but he doesn't have any questions anymore because it wasn't an issue. Rav Kook did share Heschel's view that there is a problem though with the orthodoxy. As I said, they're not in awe of God; they're in awe of the Shulchan Aruch. You can, and that is a problem, and we'll get to that. We went too far in the direction of Shulchan Aruch Judaism, that anyone who had a sense of spirituality, well, first they broke into the Hasidic movement, but then the next generation, or 2 to 3 generations later, they left Judaism completely because we did not offer them spirituality. Okay, one more question. Joseph, I've seen a source, maybe the Lubavitcher Rebbe, who ties the Rambam's opinion that deep down the recalcitrant husband wants to give the get, and the beating just helps them discover that, with this same sort of thing that Rav Kook is saying about a Jew having a more spiritual motivation deep down that differs from their open statement, that deep down a Jew wants to do the right thing in all cases. Rav Kook would accept that. The difference is, I believe, and we have some Chabadnikim, they can correct me if I'm wrong, that in Chabad, even the person marching with Hamas is still a Jew who we want to bring close, we want to bring to a Shabbos meal, that the Chabad house is open for everyone, and that Rav Kook says that no, there reaches a point, yes, the Jew can always come back, but when the Jew doesn't come back, if the Jew is still on the other side, we have halachic ways to deal with these people, and we don't just throw out the halacha. I believe that the Lubavitch approach is that in today's day and age, all those halacha are irrelevant. They're not applicable anymore because we're in a completely different era. And every Jew is to be regarded as special. Rav Kook did not think every Jew was special. All the Jews he's meeting there to Israel are special, basically, because they have the segula, he calls. But a Jew who is fighting against the Jewish people and is an enemy of the Jewish people is not special. That's a parish min hatzibur. That's michutz hamachana. And Rav Kook, there's many similar things Rav Kook and Chabad. In fact, Chabad likes to take credit because Rav Kook is really the first one to do kiruv in modern times. He, in many different ways, visiting the settlements and all that. And Rav Kook's mother is Chabad. Although she's not from Lubavitch, she's from the other. There used to be other branches of Chabad, but she's Chabad. And but Rav Kook they've translated into English his letter to Rav Yaakov Dabolovsky, the Ridbaz. He explains his whole approach that we welcome all these sinners because they have the segula. And I'm sorry if I'll end with this, though, speak politics, but we've seen something I never thought we'd see. We see Jews who are really the enemies of the Jewish people. I don't know what else you can say. When I say the Jewish people, I don't mean the state of Israel and a Zionist sense. You don't have to be at Zioni. But what is it, 7 million, 8 million, 7 million? They're Jewish lives there. And if you're working against them and you're trying to delegitimize them and you're on this, and you're on Hamas's side, then you're endangering Jews. And that's, and it's the Cherry Karta, but it's many others. And so that's, Rav Kook says that those people are not in our wider community, but all those other Jews, completely irreligious, even anti-Orthodox, but they care about the Jewish people. And I'll even go further. Angela Buchtel, I heard her on Dan Sino's podcast. This is a woman who's not halachically Jewish. And she's in a movement which has lots of problems on this matter, Israel. And she stands strong. And you have Rabbi Hirsch, the Stephen Wise Synagogue. And you have the rabbi of the Park Avenue Synagogue.
Elliot Cosgrove.
But Angela Buchtel. And many, many people like this who maybe are not halachically Jewish, but they are in our community. And the Bach says these people, you have to bury them, even maybe a little separation, but they have to be buried in a Jewish cemetery. These are people who are not just Ohev Yisrael, they are quasi-Jews. They're not halachically Jewish, but practically they're Jewish. And they're doing great things. So our community has to be much broader in that way. And unfortunately, shrink it in the other way. That makes me an extremist, then it does. She didn't convert halachically, obviously. So
I don't know what the nature of her conversion was, but she converted.
And when she in the Dan Senior podcast, she didn't mention anything about conversion. And you don't need to be converted in the Reform movement. But if she converted we're assuming it's not halakha conversion. She's never, no one's,
We
she never
can't. I
said
mean,
she's Orthodox.
I'm not making assumptions, but I
Yeah,
remember. I don't remember the details, but I remember reading because
yeah.
I used to say this too. She's a quote unquote rabbi, and she's not even Jewish because her father was Jewish. But I read somewhere.
Well, I read also that she
But
converted. I read also that she converted because people were saying to her she was the head of where she described where she's from. I forget now.
South Korea.
State of what? What?
I think South Korea. I think
No,
she,
no, that's where. But she grew up in a town, and she was like the leader of the Reformed Jewish student organization. And then she talked about that people started telling her later when she's a teenager, you're not Jewish. So I read that she converted, but look, it's not a halacha conversion. I mean, that's let's assume. But and leaving her aside, I'm saying we have lots of people like this, lots of patrilineal Jews, lots of Jews who are not halachic conversion Jews, and yet they're very important for us today, and they're doing wonderful, wonderful things, and they are part of our community. No doubt about it. Yeah. Someone practically Jewish, like someone who's practically pregnant. You know what? They're in the community in a practical sense, and a lot of these people who are men, they're going to end up marrying Jews who are Jewish women. The children will be Jewish. We're mixed in. We've never had a situation like this before, and we have so many enemies. We got to keep everyone close, and they think they're Jewish.
it's
And
along the lines of Zer Yisrael, the whole debate.
yes, I agree with that. I think it's
ago.
along the lines of Rav Chaim Amsalam speaks about Zer Yisrael. So is that practically
Right.
Jewish? Rav Chaim Amsalam, and this goes back to Sirish Kalisher, someone with a Jewish father, they say, and this is a whole school of thought, even though it's rejected by others, and this Kabbalistic sorceress is not just a non-Jew. Someone with a Jewish father is Zera Yisrael, is a partial Jew, is a Jew in potentia. It's a Jew that is a person you try to convert and try to bring close. So it's something different. What can I say? Okay, we've spoken long enough. Rabbi Kelman.
Okay, I was going to say, but now it's late. Your whole discussion before was basically Reconstructionist Judaism, Mordechai Kaplan, to be observant but not to believe. I mean, that's what really Mordechai Kaplan was and the whole Reconstruction movement. But okay, anyways.
Yes,
Okay.
and there's many people in our communities who are
Right.
Reconstructionists, no question about
Exactly.
it.
They don't
But the difference
officially
is,
identify.
Rakefa tells a story that Mordechai was once walking. Someone saw him walking with an umbrella on Shabbos in the Upper West Side, and he asked him, what? And Mordechai wore tzitzis. There's no question. But so someone asked him. This is probably an apocryphal story, but he says you don't need to get wet for a civilization. Judaism is civilization. But when I speak about the orthoprax in our community, these are people who, if they're in a place where there's no kosher food, will survive on like vegetarian stuff. Who, if there's no Erev, will, in a strange town at a hotel, will not, these are people who sacrifice. Think of the money. I mentioned this in the book, to send their kids to day schools, the financial costs. So we're not, Mordechai Kaplan, yes, it's civilization, but they were never makpid on halacha. We have people, social orthodox, who are makpid on halacha because they have a conception. I don't even know for many of them if social orthodoxy is the right term. They're not Maimonidean Orthodox. They have a different conception of the binding authority of Torah. And they're absolutely halacha observant. Okay.
Okay, thank you. Yes, we have an interesting community these days, something we never had. But you're right, and I agree. We got to keep all our friends all together. Okay, very good. Thank you. We'll see you, please God, next week. As I mentioned, Rabbi Schulman's class is he can't make it tomorrow. Now that he lives in Israel, he says he has more conflicts. But so he's not having class tomorrow. Wednesday, we're starting 9:30 a.m. The Rav Soloveitchik on the Avot. That's a 6-week series, and then Yecheskel, Natty Helfgott will give, I guess he started last week, say for Yecheskel, we're doing for the year. So Thursday Parsha, Friday Siddur, then all our regular classes continuing next week. Next week we look forward to having 11 classes, only 10 this week. So, and then the following week I think we'll have 12. But okay, just follow the emails and everybody be well. We should hear good news and lots of interesting stuff. Okay, Laila Tov, everybody. Thank you very much. Okay, be well. Thank you.